One of Karen's tires was still spinning when it rolled halfway up our front porch, wobbling like it had just escaped a bar fight. Rubber shredded, rim screaming against the wood. And Grandpa didn't even blink. He just tipped his hat back, spat into his coffee can, and muttered, "Should have read the sign, sweetheart." That's when I knew this wasn't some petty HOA spat anymore. That was the moment it stopped being annoying and turned into a full-blown war. It started the way trouble usually starts out here, with a clipboard and someone who thinks rules travel better than common sense. Karen, self-appointed empress of the Willow Creek Hills HOA, rolled onto our ranch one Thursday morning like she was leading a parade. Didn't knock, didn't call. Just drove straight through the gate in a bright orange side-by-side like she was invading a small country. I was feeding chickens when she buzzed past, rooster feathers flying everywhere. She waved at me like royalty, big sunglasses, bigger attitude, and shouted something about a routine easement inspection, like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Grandpa stepped outside in his flannel pajama shirt, boots unlaced, coffee still steaming. He looked at the tire tracks in the dirt like a man reading a bad obituary. Then he asked, calm as a pond at sunrise, "Did she say easement?" I nodded. He stared at the sky for a second, like he was checking whether God was in the mood for irony, then just said, "So it begins." Now most folks make the mistake of thinking Grandpa's slow because he limps. That limp came from an elk hunt back in '87, but what it really gave him was patience. And when Grandpa gets quiet like that, real quiet, it doesn't mean he's backing down. It means he's building something. He went under the porch and came back with an old canvas sack that clinked like a box of ghosts. Inside were caltrops, steel little devils he'd welded decades ago when poachers thought our ranch was a midnight playground. Twisted triangles, sharp from every angle. The kind of thing you don't see unless you're already too late. We walked down to the bend in the trail where the oaks curve tight and visibility disappears. He crouched low and started laying them out like seeds. Careful, even, methodical. I remember asking if maybe this was a little much. He didn't even look up. Just said, they came in like they were on safari. Let's give him the National Geographic ending. We barely made it behind a rock before the buggy came flying back around the bend. The sound when that tire hit the first caltrop, Lord, it was like a gunshot trapped inside a tin can. Rubber exploded mid-spin. The vehicle fishtailed, Karen screamed. Papers went airborne like startled pigeons. Then the rear tire hit another one. Boom. And just like that, the mighty HOA patrol folded in on itself like a cheap lawn chair. What followed was chaos dipped in perfume. Karen pacing, Doug clutching laminated bylaws like they were holy scripture, some intern blinking like she'd just discovered gravity. Then another buggy showed up. Same fate. Then a third. By the time the dust settled, it looked like a used tire graveyard out there. 3 vehicles dead in the dirt, and the HOA stranded in cowboy country with nothing but bottled water and wounded pride. Grandpa walked out slow, hands behind his back, like he was touring a museum exhibit titled Consequences. Karen spotted him and went red enough to match the barn. She started throwing around words like federal offense and sabotage, and Grandpa just smiled that dry little smile and said, "Funny, you roll onto my land uninvited, and when your toys break, I'm the criminal." That should have been the end of it. Any sane person would have taken the hint. But Karen wasn't built for hints. She was built for escalation. She called people, compliance officers, mediation committees, folks in shiny shoes who looked like they'd never stepped in manure but had strong opinions about property lines. One guy showed up talking about oversight regions and community harmony, like he was auditioning for a TED Talk. Grandpa listened for about 30 seconds, then handed me an air horn and told me to bring it over. He let that thing rip so loud it bounced off the hills like thunder in a canyon. The man nearly dropped his clipboard. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. Just said, "Calm as Sunday supper, you've been notified. Now go." That's when I realized something. This wasn't about land anymore. Not really. It was about control. Karen didn't just want a trail. She wanted the idea that she could take it. A few days later, the machines came. County trucks, gravel, survey maps. Karen standing out of a sunroof like she was leading a victory lap. That was the day Grandpa let the goats loose. If you've never seen 50 goats wander into a construction zone, let me paint you a picture. Confusion with horns, gravel getting licked like salt, one goat headbutting a dump truck tire like it owed him money. The crew froze. Karen started yelling. Grandpa walked back into the house like a man going to fetch receipts. And that's exactly what he brought back. Documents older than half the buildings in that neighborhood. Deeds, surveys, water rights tied up in ribbons and history. The kind of paperwork that smells like dust and stubbornness. You could actually see the shift happen in the air when the county guys started reading. Confidence leaking out of them like air from a punctured tire. Sheriff Hall rolled up not long after, slow and steady. That same look he always is, like he's already heard every lie a man can tell. He skimmed the papers, looked at Karen, and said the simplest thing I've ever heard sound like a hammer. Step off the property. She didn't. Not emotionally. Not yet. Because Karen's real weapon wasn't trucks or bylaws. It was optics. She came back with signs next. Volunteers. Matching shirts. Hashtags. A community hike like she was launching a wellness retreat instead of trespassing. Granola bars, yoga mats, acoustic guitar playing the same 3 chords over and over. It would have been funny if it wasn't so deliberate. Grandpa watched the whole thing from the porch without saying a word, just sipping coffee like he was measuring something invisible. Then he went inside and pulled out the old metal box, the one we all knew about but never touched. The spikes. Not lethal, not insane, just final. We laid them along the north bend where the trail curves into private land. Quiet work. No speeches. Just 2 people who understood the rules had already been broken. By afternoon, Karen rallied her people and stepped forward like she was crossing the Delaware. And then, pop, a bike tire blew. Then another. A woman shrieked. Someone tripped. Panic spreads faster than truth. And within seconds that crowd unraveled like cheap yarn. Yoga mats abandoned. Signs dropped. A man trying to Google liability with shaking hands. Sheriff Hall showed up again, took one look, and didn't even pretend to be surprised. Karen tried to spin it. Traps, malice, danger. And the sheriff just shook his head and said, "Ma'am, you brought people onto land you don't own. That liability's yours." That was the first time I saw doubt in her eyes. Not defeat, but doubt. The lawsuit came 2 weeks later, thick envelope, smug delivery. Big words stacked on top of bigger ones. Reckless endangerment. Public hazard. It read less like a legal document and more like a tantrum with footnotes. I remember watching Grandpa read it twice, slow and steady, then fold it back up like a napkin. He didn't yell, didn't panic, just went out to the barn and opened a tin box I'd never seen before. Inside were papers older than him, a deed from his grandfather, a letter from a judge long dead confirming some strange agricultural loophole buried in county law like a fossil nobody bothered digging up. And that's when the twist landed. Grandpa wasn't just some stubborn old rancher swinging steel and sarcasm. He'd been ready for this kind of fight his whole life. Not hoping for it, but prepared. Like some part of him always knew someone would come along thinking land was just lines on paper. He called his cousin Louisa, agricultural rights attorney, 3 counties over. She showed up in boots and a blazer, flipped through Karen's lawsuit, and laughed. Not mean, not loud, just the kind of laugh you make when you realize someone brought a butter knife to a gunfight. Court date came fast. Karen showed up polished, surrounded by board members and a lawyer who looked expensive enough to charge by the syllable. They talked about wellness access and community equity and shared spaces like they were pitching a nonprofit. Louisa didn't argue louder. She argued deeper. Deeds, statutes, old laws that never made headlines but still held weight. Then she played the video. Trail cam footage. Karen directing people onto private land after warnings. A memo caught in someone's hand. Don't worry if it's private. Just keep walking. You could feel the air leave the room. The judge didn't rant, didn't grandstand, just ruled. HOA claims invalid. Lawsuit dismissed. Fees awarded. Then she looked straight at Karen and said, "You came here hoping for a spectacle. What you got was justice." That was it. No dramatic music. No applause. just silence thick enough to lean on. We drove home that evening with the windows down. Dust in the air, sun dipping low. Grandpa didn't say much, just handed Louisa a glass of the good bourbon and nodded. The kind of nod that carries gratitude and history and 1,000 unsaid things. Life went quiet after that. No drones, no signs, just wind in the trees and goats being goats. The trail looked the same as always, but it felt different. Heavier, like it remembered. I asked Grandpa once if he thought Karen would ever try again. He looked out across the land for a long time before answering. Then he said something I still think about more than I probably should. Land ain't just dirt, he told me. It's memory, and memory fights back. And I guess that's the part nobody puts in bylaws. The lesson that sneaks up on you after the noise fades. Power on paper looks big until it meets roots in the ground. People who've never built something think everything can be negotiated. But some things, home, history, the dirt your people are buried in, they don't bargain. They endure. That day, Karen learned it in a courtroom. We learned it in the quiet after. The last I heard, she sold her place and moved somewhere with sidewalks and committees and perfectly labeled recycling bins. No more trail wars. No more speeches about shared spaces. Just gone, like a storm that finally ran out of sky. Sometimes I walk that bend where it all started. You'd never know anything happened there. Grass grows back. Time smooths things over. But if you stand real still, you can almost hear echoes, tires popping, goats bleating, Grandpa chuckling under his breath. And yeah, I'll admit it, there's a little satisfaction in that. Not the cruel kind, the earned kind. The kind that settles in your bones and reminds you that sometimes karma doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it just shows up wearing a judge's robe and leaves everything exactly where it belongs. So here's what I keep wondering, and maybe you will too. When someone crosses a line they know they shouldn't, when they push and push until something pushes back, where does justice end and revenge begin? Is defending what's yours always right, no matter how far it goes? Or is there a point where standing your ground starts looking like becoming the thing you were fighting? I don't know the perfect answer. I just know what it felt like standing on that porch, watching the dust settle, knowing nobody was taking that land from us ever again. But I'm curious what you think. If you were in our boots, would you have fought the same way? Or walked away and let the world have its trail? Tell me what you'd do, and if you've ever had a line in the dirt you refuse to let anyone cross.